Welcome to the Following the Plastic Flow panel, from oil industry to our wardrobes to our ocean. I am your host and moderator today. Rebecca has asked me to moderate this lovely panel and also speak a little bit about my work. Of course, Google has logged me out of my Gmail for my Google Slides here, so sorry about that. Let's see here. Let's bring this up. So fun. My apologies. We had all this running. We did a 30-minute run through ahead of time. All right, here we go. Share screen. And we will present. Great. So we're a little behind schedule, but we still have an amazing program set for you guys today. So before jumping into the flow of plastics in our agenda today, I thought it was really important to start with a short visualization exercise. So imagine your favorite water body. Close your eyes if you like. Settle into a place where water brings you joy. Is it the ocean you drive out to every summer? Is it the river you floated in with your cousins last spring? Is it a trickling waterfall at the turnaround point of your favorite hike? Or maybe it's the water body that you clean drinking water. How are you interacting with that water body? What is it about that water body that brings you joy? Why is it your favorite? This is a picture from a couple weeks ago and one of my favorite water bodies, the San Francisco Bay. Recently, thanks to COVID, my husband and I have had the opportunity to escape from home before we have to walk our dog and jump into our folding kayaks and catch a San Francisco Bay sunrise. I love the San Francisco Bay because it's always full of life, from the ever-changing currents and tides to the exciting sea creatures like harbor seals, sea lions, and porpoises, to the wide variety of sea vessels from the humblest sailboat to the fanciest of yachts. The Bay is a great source of inspiration for me. This is also a picture from that same day. The sun has risen a little bit higher in the sky. I've collected a few things that don't belong in a thriving, healthy marine ecosystem. Giant plastic water bottles, styrofoam, food packaging, bubble wrap, disposable face masks, plasticized mail brochures, a green tennis ball, and a giant trash bag tied off with who knows what in it. We found it all on this trip. Unfortunately, this is a common sight in our current material world. Now think back to your favorite water body. Can you think of an experience where plastic has caused you to pause and ask, where did this come from? Why is it here? Should I pick this up? What can I do to prevent this from happening in the future? Well, what if I told you that plastics have a much deeper impact on healthy living marine ecosystems than just the things we can see or pick off the beach? What if I told you there are ways we can change that impact by understanding more about the flow of plastics and what we decide to include in our everyday wardrobe? So here we are today with a thoughtfully curated panel by Fibershed of marine-focused voices. We'll go up the material stream to understand how and why the modern wardrobe is damaging life in marine ecosystems, how plastic-based clothing is connected to the fossil fuel industry's ongoing carbon emissions, and how natural fiber systems provide a pathway to healthier material impacts and climate resilience. I'll kick us off with an introduction to my consultancy, where my work in technical textile consulting intersects with plastics today, and give you an overview of current materials research landscape with regard to fiber fragment pollution, also known as microfiber pollution. Later, we will hear from our panel of marine-focused experts. Unfortunately, Terry Sawyer of Hog Island Oysters had a last-minute business need pop up, so it will be just us women today. I promise we still have an exciting program. A little bit about my consultancy and myself. With over 13 years of textile development experience working with apparel and footwear brands like the North Face, Vans, Timberland, Guess, Rothy's, and more, working with new material innovators in both the natural and technical materials lens, sustainability, nonprofits like FiberShed and the Green Science Policy Institute, I feel so fortunate to have been educated by many of the material world's leading thinkers. In 2018, I was able to fulfill my dream of being an entrepreneur, starting a sustainable textiles consultancy called Materevolve. At Materevolve, we envision a materials world that stewards the health and wealth of all living systems, a world where science and creativity are in balance, and we can wear textiles that match our values. Through our work, we support our clients from apparel and footwear brands, material innovators, nonprofit and government to design, build textile systems through the lens of soil, sea, and circularity. We provide mostly technical textile consulting. Pre-COVID, we're really building a lot of different experiential learning events, which now, we all live in a virtual world. So this is a picture from 2018 with Captain Charles Moore in the Algalita on a plastic pollution cruise with folks from Patagonia and Reformation and ACC California. So that was a really great experiential learning event. We also provide educational speaking. And I'd be remiss not to mention my deep history with Rebecca and the FiberShed community. Great pictures from Paige Green here. Working with FiberShed has opened my eyes to the power and potential of natural fiber systems as a climate and soul building solution. As a textile developer for the North Face, I supported locally sourced and artfully designed backyard project. As a materials manager for FiberShed, I supported local wool and fine fiber producers in exploring and building sustainable domestic fiber systems, and the support of launching the North Face Cali wool collection pictured on the right, the beautiful beanie and coat. And I'm also working currently with FiberShed on implementing carbon farming and creating the market pull-through with 5 California brands for cotton here in California. Healthy soils and healthy seas are deeply rooted in the lens we bring to textiles, and I am so happy to join the symposium this year. So let's talk about the material world. We've been on this planet for thousands of years, and really manufactured fibers or synthetic fibers materials have only really come out in the last 150 years. I wanted to, at the risk of hyper-simplification, I thought I'd start with a quick truncated textile specific history, just so we can frame ourselves in that. Humans have only been living on this planet for thousands of years, sorry, I reread. I'll start with the timeline. So in England in 1855, the first patent for artificial silk was granted to a Swiss chemist. He dissolved the fibrous inner bark of a mulberry tree, chemically modifying it to create cellulose. Around that same time, polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, was polymerized for the first time. You'll hear more about PVC later from Diane. In 1910, just 3 years after Leo Baekeland created Bakelite, the first real synthetic mass-produced plastic, we saw the American Viscose Company beginning the production of rayon here in America, the first mass-produced synthetic fiber from chemically modifying feedstocks like cotton waste to produce cellulose fiber. By the mid-1920s, textile manufacturers could actually purchase that rayon and another synthetic fiber, acetate, for half the price of raw silk. And so began the increasing prevalence of manufactured fibers in the textile fiber market. In 1931, we created nylon. You've got this beautiful leg here displaying the nylon. We saw nylon 6.6 in 31 and nylon 6 in 38, promising higher strength, elasticity, weight, and resistance to mildew that the industry touted as helping them win World War II. By the 1950s is where we saw polyester and acrylic really come. The first product that came to market from DuPont was their Dacron polyester wool suit, blended suit that touted the benefits of wrinkle-free and being a much more comfortable, thermally comfortable suit than your 100% woolen suit. By the 1960s, manufactured fiber accounted for nearly 30% of American mill textile consumption. Fiber innovation continued to develop Materials innovation of manufactured fibers offered greater comfort, flame resistance, reduced clinging, soil release, wider whites, altering dullness, brightness, luster, easier dyeability, and better blending qualities. Spandex, a stretchable fiber, was also introduced to the marketplace in the 60s. Consumers bought more and more clothing of these synthetic materials, particularly of polyester. We also saw electric dryers come on the market. So people were replacing clotheslines and looking more for wash and wear garments and removing ironing from their household chores. Manufactured or synthetic fibers were providing customers with a whole new way to interact with their clothing that allowed for convenience and ease. Meanwhile, by the early 1970s, 1972, San Francisco's very own marine biologist Ed Carpenter noticed peculiar little white flecks found in his research expedition in the Sargasso Sea, the North Atlantic, the first microplastics and fibers on record. That same decade, polyester continued to deliver on increasing expectations for performance, price, quantity, and increased in prominence in our wardrobes. By the 1990s, thank you, Will Smith, for donning this beautiful polyester suit. When I could purchase clothing with my hard-earned chore money, manufactured fibers overtook natural fiber production. This paired with major shifts in offshoring clothing and product manufacturing, it became clear that the American and global priority was more quantity, more often, and lower cost. Fast forward to today, almost 3 decades later, we are finally starting to see a public awareness on the impacts of plastic pollution in our oceans and waterways, mostly as it pertains to single-use plastics and things that appear on our beaches and float in our waterways. Fiber-specific pollution and research is growing in awareness, but yet not all of us even really understand what are in our wardrobes. So we'll hear from Kirstin later about what we know of San Francisco-based wardrobes. One crazy statistic from Roland Geyer from a study from the University of Santa Barbara on the production and use and fate of synthetic polymers is that half of all plastics ever made by humankind were only produced in the last 13 years. That is the exact same amount of time that I've been working in textiles. Let me say that again. We've produced half of the plastics we've ever made in the history of humankind just in the past 13 years. This is not the materials legacy that I want to leave. So what does today's material world look like? These same statistics you heard from Rebecca in the first session from the Textile Exchange and really basically showing us that where we're at today in purchasing fibers, 63% of global fiber production in 2019 was synthetic fibers. Polyester alone had around 52%. And for those that aren't a super textile nerd like myself, synthetic fibers include polyester, nylon, acrylic, spandex, also known as elastane or the brand name Lycra, or man-made cellulosics like rayon, viscose, rayon from bamboo, tencel, modal. So these are a lot of different fibers you're seeing on your care labels today and content labels today. So that's just good to know that's what we mean by this. But the main plastic synthetic fibers used in apparel today are polyester, nylon, and elastane. Polypropylene and polyethylene are also fibers used in textiles, but very little in your everyday apparel and more in industrial applications across multiple sectors like ag, automotive, and more. So what is a microfiber? We're seeing, 2 different communities of people describing microfibers and calling attention to it. For the past few decades, the textile industry has been donning it as a unique and beneficial property. Microfiber to us and our community is about a weight by length definition. It's about creating finer fibers to give you more performance features and attributes. We got this picture here. You can see the microfiber is much finer than any natural material that or natural fiber that you see on market. Because we're manufacturing, we can change size and shape, and it's a lot easier with these thermoplastics to do that. Meanwhile, you have the marine science community that has sort of walked themselves into the fibers category from macroplastic, mesoplastics, and then microplastics being anything 5 millimeters or smaller. From a size perspective, it could be a nurdle, it could be a fragment, it could be a fiber. So essentially to the ocean science community, we know that it's anything fibrous that's less than 5 millimeters in any one direction. So we don't necessarily have the same, we definitely don't have the same definition. And I've actually seen in my work that this can be a really big hurdle for discussions between textile industry, policy, and marine scientists, because we don't have that same language there. Many of you may have heard of a microfiber cloth. This picture on the bottom left is a yarn that's been extruded to have really high surface area so that it cleans the surface of your computer screen or your glasses much better than, say, a wool or cotton that might leave lint behind. So that's just, terminology, language. I thought that was really important to call out. Where do microfibers come from? Well, we have heard a lot, and there is a growing research on laundering as a pathway, and we'll hear more from Diane Lynn later on their investigations here in the San Francisco Bay. But there are other places these fibers can be coming from as well. So industrial laundries from hotels or uniform rental programs, when we walk in carpets or different home textiles that are around us as well. There could be fibers coming from that, any outdoor textiles that sit in sun and wind and rain. A lot of times they're designed to stand up to these different elements, but at the same time, they could also be contributing to this as well. And then finally, something that I think is super fascinating, since I come from more of the apparel side, this picture from Bridgestone actually shows there's belt and casing systems where they're weaving in and embedding polyester, nylon, and rayon fibers into tires to give them strength properties and better wear and tear properties. So you'll hear more again from Diana later today about what they saw from a rubber tire fragment perspective as well as fibers. So what do we know about microfiber release? Essentially, I'm deeply aware of the fibershed community attention to soil health and carbon farming practices. The most prevalent fact I wanted to call out is that we know that wastewater treatment infrastructure does appear to be capturing a significant amount of fibers in the standard filtration, but we are unfortunately, in many cases, utilizing those biosolids captured and applying them back out on the land as a nutritious land amendment, without the hesitation around whether those fibrous particles are nutritious food for our working lands. An important study that came out last month from the Nature Conservancy and UC Santa Barbara Bren School recently unveiled a study quantifying the amount of synthetic microfibers released in the environment from washing machines and wastewater in California. The study estimates that approximately 1,700 metric tons of synthetic microfibers enter natural systems each year. Scientists note that this number could be as high as 4,000 metric tons, or the equivalent of more than 80 million rubber duckies. This diagram here from 2016 from UC Santa Barbara research scientists shows emission pathways of synthetic microfibers generated from just apparel washing alone. So what is the industry doing today? Globally, research and textile brand leaders are convening to better understand the impacts of fiber fragmentation, the mechanism that would create microfiber pollution, throughout the entire material production and use life cycle. One of the biggest organized efforts I wanted to highlight is the TMC, or the Microfiber Consortium, a nonprofit spun out of the outdoor industry and currently representing a membership base of over 40 brands and research leaders. The first steps in developing product solutions is to identify each stage of the product or garment life cycle that can impact or affect fiber release. This graphic from the TMC shows each stage and the considerations regarding it, to also agree upon a way to measure fiber fragmentation or fiber release from a variety of textiles. Thankfully, as of last year, many of the individual industry groups working on this test method came together and hoped to align on a global test method, and we hope to align on a global test method soon. For US apparel brands interested in supporting this development and rollout of this test method, please reach out to me separately, and I can connect you to the US organization AATCC, who is leading the effort here in the US. Rebecca also wanted me to call out what role policy has played so far. So for plastics as a category of materials, particularly in single-use plastics, California legislation is playing a very strong role in mitigating and eliminating the use of plastics in our everyday lives. From plastic bag bans to consumer messaging around the impacts of plastic pollution, government agencies are eager to build strategy around microplastics and the category of fibers today. In 2018, a plastic microfiber labeling bill, AB 2379, was introduced by Assemblymember Bloom, essentially reading that any new clothing made from a fabric that has 50% synthetic or polyester material or more would bear a conspicuous label, and potentially also need a care label that includes a statement that the garment sheds plastic microfibers when washed. While this bill did not pass, there are many groups eager to find policy solutions that can, one, support education and messaging of producers and consumers on fiber fragment pollution, and two, support solutions to mitigate and prevent further fiber fragmentation. And so, part of that effort is an upcoming workshop on November 17th. I am partnering with a colleague, Carolyn Box, previously of the organization Five Gyres that coined the term plastic smog. And with the sponsorship and support of the NOAA Marine Debris Program, we're hosting the California Microfiber Workshop, Science, Innovation, and Connection. But by partnering with NOAA's Marine Debris Program, California State Water Board, and the Ocean Protection Council, our program brings together textile innovation, the latest in science, and marine policy with the goal of building a shared understanding and finding ways our California stakeholders can align together to bring research and solution. We're excited to have Rebecca and Fibershed and their regional manufacturing initiative. You'll hear a little bit more about this later as part of the agenda to highlight the regional potential that California has to redevelop regenerative natural fiber systems. So how do we innovate for a blue material world? Is sourcing recycled polyester from single-use plastic bottles, or what we are calling ocean-bound plastics, a textile solution that supports equitable and healthy marine living systems? What else can we learn from following the plastic flow from oil industry to our wardrobes to our oceans? Let's hear from our exciting panelists today. So we're gonna have Kirstin Miller kick us off from Ecocity Builders. And the way this is gonna work is we're gonna have each panelist introduce themselves for about 12 minutes each. We'll have a short Q&A where I will be asking questions I've pre-prepared, and then 20 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. So feel free to start typing in your Q&A questions already, and I'll be watching. And then I'll be asking the questions of the panelists when we get to that section. So thank you, tech team, and thank you, Kirstin. It looks like you're already ready to go.
Great. Thank you so much, Krystle. I'm so excited to be on this panel today. And I'm going to just jump right into it. Ecocity Builders, my nonprofit, we teamed up with Fibershed, and we took a look at what's in California's closets and where are these fibers, these materials coming from, how are they being used, where do they go, and finally, how do they end up in nature? So we help kind of tease out the story of materials from nature to nature. So in this instance, we're looking at a fiber system from source to sink, and we're taking the aspect of how does that involve plastic pollution, and how is that impacting the environment, and then how can we mitigate that, or how can we resolve these conflicts of healthy systems from nature to humans and back to nature. So I'm going to just start with the conclusions. So, and then I'll dive into sort of how we derived this. So we've concluded that from studying this flow of fiber through California's closets, that plastic contamination in the fiber system can't really sufficiently be broken down or mitigated so that it's not harmful to the environment at this time. So We think the clearest pathway to stopping plastic fiber pollution of sea and soil is to remove it from the fiber system and substitute it with natural fibers that can be safely returned to nature. And then from our estimates, the Western fiber region can supply everyone living in it with a natural fiber capsule wardrobe, and I'll talk more about what that means later, using just 1 year's raw material supply from the region itself, just from the Western fiber region. And it's feasible for each USA fiber region to return fiber processing systems that have been outsourced, and we can rebuild and expand America's textile economy. And furthermore, and finally, fiber sheds and fiber systems operations and management can help restore and protect the environment. For example, through regenerative grazing for fire control, regenerative agriculture to create carbon sinks, green manufacturing, and more. So some of the emerging research that we based our conclusions on about the danger of plastic in the fiber system, I really point to these 3 studies. This first one is synthetic microfiber emissions to land rival those to water bodies and are growing. And one of the insights from that, they say annual emissions to terrestrial environments and landfill combined are now exceeding those to water bodies. Improving access to wastewater treatment is expected to further shift synthetic microfiber emissions from water bodies to terrestrial environments. And then they say preventing emissions at the source would therefore be a more effective mitigation measure. The second really important study, Diane is going to be speaking about because she wrote it with her colleagues. And then the other one is this University of Plymouth study. And one of the takeaways is their results indicate that one person could release almost 300 million polyester microfibers per year to the environment by washing their clothes, but more than 900 million to the air by simply wearing the garments. The key story here is that the emissions of fibers while wearing clothes is likely of a similar order of magnitude as that from washing them. That constitutes a substantial and previously unquantified direct release to the environment. So now I'm going to back up and start with where we started initially our research. So we had our main 3 questions that we were wondering, and we were helping FiberShed to quantify and visualize this. Where do our clothes currently come from and where do they end up? What is the capacity and potential of our own fiber region to supply everyone living there with a plastic-free natural fiber wardrobe? And how can then we activate a healthy regional fiber system? So to answer the first question, we teamed up with our intern at Google and we developed this app, and we solicited people from our networks to do a closet audit. So the app is still active. So if you want to try it out, I put the link there, FiberShed collection at bubbleapps.io. And we actually had over 1,000 responses. However, our app was a little wonky in the beginning. So we got about 600 samples that we used for this assessment that were complete. And initially, just to add a little context to this, we started this project wanting to do this process in person. So we even developed a whole educational module. We were going to go into community colleges and high schools. We were lining all that up to make this a really deeply educational and participatory process. But then, of course, COVID. So we had to take this online. So anyway, we did take it online, and I wanted to say this in particular because since we did put it online, it went mostly to the Fibershed community people and the Ecocity community people. So I think, you know, our results were a little bit skewed because we weren't getting a completely, you know, healthy random sample. We're getting people who are already interested in these, you know, in these topics. So that's just a little like context behind the sample. So with the data that we got, we created this, what we call an urban metabolic information system. So what drives this whole diagram is the middle part, which is the wardrobe audits that we did. So we created a source to sink Sankey diagram that's weighted against the different amounts that are coming through these flows. So it starts at the top, you see where people reported when they did the audit and they looked at the labels on their clothing, like where were they sourced, which is very, I know, dicey because this is a very complex system. You know, just because it says made in China, it doesn't mean that actually the materials, like if it was a cotton product, it doesn't mean that the cotton was grown in China too, necessarily. Like a lot of it could have actually be coming from the United States because we export to China. But the sources are where the made in tag is telling us it's made in. So these sources here, USA, China, Indonesia, Cambodia, Central America, Bangladesh, India, Mexico, Vietnam. I think ours was weighted a little bit more heavily to the USA because of so many people from the Fibershed community, you know, weighing in on the survey. But nevertheless, one thing I wanted to just point out is that despite the respondents being from these, you know, kind of eco-minded networks, still over 54% of the wardrobe surveys had plastic contamination. So by plastic, we mean the same synthetic fibers that Krystle was mentioning in her presentation earlier. So it was either contaminated just by a pure synthetic, you know, material, or it's a blend. So we counted anything that's has any plastic fiber in it as part of this synthetic content, because ultimately we can't, you know, separate out the plastic from the good stuff. And then it all ends up in, you know, eventually in the landfill. The uses and the downstream conversion show that in our communities from this audit, more people donate and reuse, repurpose their clothes than you would typically find in a study of, you know, of a closet in California. So there's a lot of more reuse and donating so that the clothes like stay within, you know, the use cycle before they eventually, though, like everything, end up in a landfill. And then through some of it, through washing and just through wearing, it's going directly into soil or the ocean. Now the sinks part really needs a lot more research and investigation, but I mean, just the logic of it, suffice it to say that eventually all of these things are ending up back into nature. And right now they're, you know, they're contributing a lot of contamination to soil, sea, and also to our bodies. You know, we're inhaling it, it's coming into our bodies and bodies of other organisms, and it's damaging our health. These are maps that were taking the same data and the same like logic and the progression, and we're trying to start to visualize it on geographically. So this is just a version that needs more work, but we're going to be expanding upon this type of an app that allows us to take the data and not only create a diagram, but also a map. So then our second question, what is the capacity and the potential of our fiber region to give us all a healthy natural fiber wardrobe? So we did this kind of back of the envelope estimate, but we had to like set some conditions. So we said, what kind of a wardrobe are we going to provide for everybody? And we decided it would be a capsule wardrobe, which this slide tells us is 30 to 40 pieces. Now I'm sort of running out of time here, so I'm gonna just go ahead. So we took a look at different fiber regions of the United States that we sort of conceptually developed with our partners at FiberShed, and looked into then the Western fiber region. What are the types of fibers that are primarily available to us there? And if we use these fibers, could we provide a capsule wardrobe to everybody living in that region, not just California? So we went bigger. We went 77 million people, the population of the Western fiber region. How much material would we need if we gave everybody their capsule wardrobe? So I'm gonna, in this next part, when we come back to my second part, I'll dive more into this data and the results of this too. So this is just suffice it to say that yes, we can provide everybody in the Western fiber region with a complete wardrobe just based on 1 year's raw material supply from the Western region. So I'm going to just stop here, and then I'm going to go back into more of the details of it later on. So back to you, Krystle.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirstin. And before we jump to the next speaker, Diane, we did have a quick question on survey results. Are those available to folks? Are they able to see those on your website, or is there a good place to go for that?
Yeah, we're right now we're wrapping up all the results of this study, and we're going to make all those results available. I'm really hoping that we continue to evolve it too, and continue to collect more samples as well.
Great, great. Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to Diane. So we're not exactly following from source to sink. Like I said, we're ebbing and flowing with the plastic flow here. So we'll hear from Diane. She's a 4th generation fisherwoman, has done an amazing amount of work in activism and around the environment and her community. So I'm really excited to have her introduce her work and what she's seen from the impacts of plastics manufacturing in her world. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Diane, and I think the tech team will bring up her presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Krystle. Like she mentioned, I'm a 4th generation fisherman from the Texas Gulf Coast. My family's been in this area for probably 135 years. So I know the area well, and I consider it my home, and I take the waters very personal. Probably for the last 30 years, I have fought the wastewater that has been going into our bays around our county, because the fishermen, they use all the waters all over the county. And but for most of plastics, Texas, I have been very focused for 30 years, and for the last 10 years, I've been focused on trying to get some help with all of the plastics from this industry. And as you can see down there, that's Formosa Plastics, and they have pretty much taken over the town of Point Comfort, Texas. a very ironical name. They bought out a lot of the initial townspeople. The school is now shut down, so the kids can't attend school. They have to be bused across a freeway, a body of water. And but this company is 2,500 acres. It probably has on the verge of 4,000 to 5,000 workers, and it makes the plastic that we're talking about. And so I'm kind of like at the far end of the beginning of the plastic cycle. If you can go to the next slide, please. Can y'all hit?
David, do you have the slides up at the moment? I actually don't see them.
Oh, you don't?
I don't see them.
I see it. Y'all don't see it?
I see the slides being shared from David.
David,
Hello.
okay. Hi, David, can we spotlight you? I can pin you.
Hello.
All right, well, if everyone can pin David, the tech support,
Yeah.
I can see your slides now.
Can you?
I had to change my view to speaker view.
Okay. Can y'all see that first slide of Formosa and Point Comfort, Texas? Is that Bill? Can we go to the next slide? David? Hello?
Yep, I'm trying to.
Oh, sorry. Sorry there.
Looks like the attendees can't change their view. Only
Yeah, yeah.
panelists can. Someone saw it for a second
Oh,
and
there
then
you
it went
go.
away.
Very good. All right. What
good.
you're seeing now is the pellets.
Great.
I think everybody's known them for nurdles, but the workers inside the plant they get very irritated when they hear people call them nurdles, because to them, they're plastic pellets, and they're either polyethylene or polypropylene pellets. And this is one of the products of Formosa Plastics in Texas. And as you can see, these are plastic pellets or nurdles that are floating in the water bodies around Formosa. This one is in Cox's Creek. Imagine if you did a tiny sample there in 10 minutes, you probably could have got probably 80,000 pellets very, very quickly. And Formosa has, in their chemical plant, they lose these pellets, one, through their stormwater outfalls, which should only contain stormwater, but as you can see, it doesn't. And also a wastewater treatment discharge that goes into the bay, and it goes out through their waste stream too. So this company has a waste stream into the bay that is approximately now, I think, around 9 million gallons per day. And they have approximately 12 stormwater outfalls. Some of these stormwater outfalls, a plane can fit in it. That's how big they are. And sometimes the discharge can be the volume of a river. If I could have the next slide. So this is the powder. So you not only get pellets from a plastic manufacturer, you get powder. You get PVC powder, polyvinyl chloride, you get polyethylene, and you get polypropylene. And then, like I said, you also, from Formosa, you get polyethylene pellets and polypropylene pellets. And this has come straight out of their stormwater outfalls. And as you can see, this is what it looks like in the water. And this happens quite often. I think we collected, I'll show you pictures later, but we collected for 3 years and had over 2,500 samples and over 7,000 photos and videos. Can I have the next slide? And this is what you see is a combination of powder and the pellets in the bay. And in the bay is where you have shrimpers, you have oystermen, you have crabbers, you have fin fishermen, and these plastic pellets are everywhere. I believe it was estimated in the 3-year period where the company tried to do a cleanup after we filed suit on them. They collected, and it's not what was lost from the company, it was what a group of men picked up in a 3-year period. There were 75 billion pellets out there that they picked up in like a 4-day period. If I could have the next picture. And this is aquatic vegetation floating in the water. And you can see all the pellets in the roots. So it's everywhere. It's on the plants. It's in the root system. It's floating and it's caught in vegetation. And it's just right now we're trying to envision a cleanup, and it's extremely difficult to figure out how to clean up these pellets. And with Formosa, you know, we filed suit, but we found during the discovery that Formosa had known they were losing pellets and plastic to the environment since they began production, and that would be 26 years. So this has been going on for 26 years. Okay, next picture, if you don't mind. Okay, this will give you an idea how plastics, one, can get in your stormwater outfalls, how it can get in your waste stream, how it can get into the bays, how it can get in the community, because people in the community were literally getting this powder in their swimming pools, on their cars, on the streets. And so this particular series of photos was taken by a shift supervisor. So he was a higher up. You know, this guy was making $180,000 a year. So he was one of the important guys. He was supervising the SPVC unit, which means it's a specialized type of polyvinyl chloride. And interesting contaminant of this is a vinyl chloride. And vinyl chloride will cause liver cancer. And this shift supervisor, he started taking these photos because he realized the company was violating environmental standards and regulations. And so what you see is what this 9-story unit open to the environment, what would happen when they had releases. And he said these releases were about at least once a week. And so at the bottom left, you can see it looks like a blizzard when there is a release of this powder. Up on the top left, you see what the unit, I mean, it's wide open, you know, and so it goes into the fields, it goes into other units, it goes into the stormwater, it flies everywhere. And on the far right top, you can see it's the top story of the 9-story unit. And he said, when you get like that, you know, you have to try to clean it up because you're trying to get another production going. The main thing was production, get it moving. So they would go on this 9-story top and just start shoveling it over the side to get it cleaned up. And in the middle picture, you can see that flare, that yellow fire. That's showing that there's definitely an upset in this unit. And that vacuum truck was the largest vacuum truck they had. And this truck had vacuumed up some of the powder and emissions, and it was flooding. So a little bit everything. And after the third haul, load was so great that you can see they busted out the tire. The next one, please. And this is one of the water keepers. It's interesting that the people that worked with me was only a handful. You know, there's like 4 of us, and these were workers from the chemical plant. This guy in front of me, he was the supervisor of the PVC unit, and he had worked there for 25 years. And he quit, he retired on a medical deferment because he said the releases and the lying was literally driving him crazy. And so he got out. But he's one of my most dedicated volunteers, and we've been doing it. We collect samples for almost 4 years, and it was all volunteer, and it was almost daily. Every day we would go out and collect samples. And so this just shows Ronnie, and because the pellets that, this is, there's water out there, and he's probably got water up to his knees, and he's going out there because you'll find these pellets all in this vegetation. Next slide, please. This is me in my kayak, because to reach all the outfalls, you have to have a way of getting around. When we first started, we just waded out into the water. We waded onto the beaches. But, once we learned where all of the outfalls were, because you can see in this picture, this is outfall 12. And it's pretty far down the creek. It takes me like 2 hours to paddle to get there. And this is one of the small stormwater outfalls. Like I said, some of them are so big you can literally put a plane or a helicopter in them. And I was out there monitoring for pellets. And okay, next slide. And this was my other two guys. That was Ronnie, and it's Dale. They kind of call him his bodyguard because he's such a big fella. But anyway, this is outfall 8. And I know when Formosa started, they started trying to do cleanup when we filed a citizen suit. And in this area, they were getting at times 500 bags a day of pellets and debris. And the bags were like 40 gallons. So this was what was coming out, these stormwater outfalls. And like I said, it's supposed to be stormwater, and it wasn't. Okay, the next slide. Okay, this is a kind of a summary of all of the samples that we took. There were over 25 samples. It was powder, it was pellets, and we wrote the time, the day, the place, what the wind was doing, and whether it was plastic powder or plastic pellets. And we loaded all of these samples into a goat cart, and we hauled it to court. And that was our evidence, because Formosa had never reported a release ever in 26 years. And TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, our state agency, environmental agency, had never found them. So the evidence was what we collected. It wasn't what was on the books or what was in Formosa's documents. We collected our own evidence, and like I said, we won the case, and we got a $50 million settlement for the case, and we now have zero discharge of plastics from the company. We have a cleanup, and we also are part of the fixing inside the plant on why it violated the permit so much, why there was so much pollution. So we are a part of the engineers and the cleanup, and also because it is zero discharge, we have enforcement, not the state agency. We have enforcement, and we put it on local environmental projects. So that's kind of my story.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Awesome. Well, you know, so we've heard from the plastic manufacturing side. We've heard about the Texas community and where Diane spends most of her time in realizing the impacts and really, you know, bringing that back to manufacturing to think about environmental first. So now we'll move to Diana Lynn, who is a research scientist with the San Francisco Estuary Institute, who just last year, her and a group of scientists finished a 3-year study looking at microplastics in the San Francisco Bay. So she's going to report to us, give us a good picture of what they found and what she does with the SFEI. Thanks, Diana.
And can you guys all see my slides?
Yes.
Great. So I'm Diana. I'm a senior scientist at the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and I actually joined SFEI 4 years ago at the launch of this study. This project was a collaboration between SFEI and 5 gyres, and was a 3-year project that was about $1 million that was largely funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And since we've completed this study, it's really advanced our understanding of microplastics, and it has been a model for how to do microplastic investigations for a region. So it's great that Krystle already introduced what microplastics are, but just wanted to share this slide. Microplastics are tiny pieces of plastic, less than 5 millimeters. They come in various shapes and sizes like fiber, film, pellets, fragments, and foam. And these morphologies are important because they give us a clue to what they might have come from. And these microplastics, they're essentially the detritus of modern day society, where over 350 million tons of plastic are produced globally. And when we analyze plastics, they also come in various polymers that are the breakdown products of the various different types of plastic that we see. And so based on the morphology and the plastic, we can trace and link to potential sources of these microplastics. We're increasingly finding microplastics to be everywhere. Not only are they in the urban environment, but we're also finding them in remote regions. And we know that wildlife are ingesting these microplastics, but we don't know what are the impacts. And so this is still an active area of research. For the San Francisco Bay Microplastic Project, we're really fortunate to also collaborate with Chelsea Brockman, who is a professor at the University of Toronto, who is a leading researcher in the field of microplastics. We had several goals for our study, including advancing the science and also understanding microplastic pollution in the Bay. And so this included monitoring microplastics throughout San Francisco Bay, measuring what the fish and bivalves were ingesting, measuring sediment, as well as collecting water samples in the adjacent oceans outside the Golden Gate Bridge, which are national marine sanctuaries. Another important goal of the study is to inform management action. So we need to understand how these microplastics are entering the bay. So we also collected wastewater samples and urban stormwater runoff samples. So next I'm going to go into our findings. So wastewater is everything that goes down your drain. It goes to a wastewater treatment plant, it gets treated, and what we sampled was final wastewater effluent that gets discharged to the bay. We sampled at 8 of the largest facilities in the bay, which represent 70% of the wastewater flows. And we found various types of microplastics. The dominant form was fibers. And when we looked at the fibers more closely, many of these we could identify as plastic. And you can see I have a large fraction that's like anthropogenic dyed, because the way we analyze to see what type of plastic they are is using spectroscopy. And sometimes the signal from the dye is so strong that it covers up the signal from the polymer itself. And so we can see that it's anthropogenic, it's dyed, but we don't know what the underlying polymer is. And then the other portions included natural-based fibers. For urban stormwater runoff, we sampled at various watersheds in the bay. Each of these polygons represents a watershed, which means that all of the precipitation that falls on that landscape drains through a creek or channel that we sampled at. So we were able to sample that watershed by sampling that one single point during a storm event that was large enough to mobilize sediment and plastic and other debris. So we sampled at 12 different tributaries. And what we saw, again, was a lot of fibers. And the other fraction was mostly fragments. And Krystle alluded to this earlier. A lot of the fragments were black, rubbery particles that, that we think are tire wear particles. Among the fibers, again, we saw a lot of plastic. Again, we saw the anthropogenic dyed as well as some of these natural-based fibers. So I think identifying so much fibers in the stormwater was really enlightening, because we normally think of like our laundry and going through wastewater treatment plants. We were also seeing a lot of these fibers in urban stormwater. And so we're trying to think about how these fibers get into urban stormwater. One potential source could be closed dryer vents. There was one study that indicated that that the release rates from these dryer vents could be even greater than from the washing process. The concentrations in urban stormwater was actually 100 times greater than what we saw in wastewater. So it was really great that we were able to compare these two different pathways together. And when we take these concentrations and extrapolate to the amount the water flows going to the bay, we find that the load, or the total number of microplastics coming from urban stormwater, is actually 300 times or greater than 300 times greater than that of urban wastewater. Just going over the results that we saw in the bay itself. Most of what we saw in the bay water was fibers, and we did also see fragments, foam, film, and spheres. Many of these were identified as plastic. Most of these were plastic and acrylic. We also sampled small prey fish, these including topsmell and anchovies. These are really important to the bay ecosystem because they're the base of the food web, and they get ingested by all sorts of wildlife that are bigger than them. And most of what we saw was fibers. We also sampled bivalves, and again, we saw mostly fibers. And so this is really interesting because we see from these results that wildlife are ingesting these microplastics, and the predominant form is actually fibers. And we're thinking about why that might be a case. And it could be because the fiber shape just makes it harder for the organisms to excrete. So as part of the study, our collaboration with Rusty Holloman from UC Davis was to develop a model to better understand microplastic in the bay, as well as connections with the adjacent oceans. So he built the first hydrodynamic model of microplastics in the bay. And so next I'm going to show a simulation of how this model works. This isn't actually how microplastics is released, but I'll just let it play and then explain. So in this simulation, we drop a bunch of microplastics near the Golden Gate Bridge. And you see the sloshing back and forth is from tidal movement. And so this model is really useful in understanding how the movement of the water carries microplastics between the bay and the adjacent oceans. The red particles are more buoyant particles, green are passively buoyant particles, and blue are sinking particles. And you can see from this video that the red, more buoyant ones easily get moved out of the bay versus the blue sinking ones stay within the bay. They kind of get stuck. And so then they can accumulate in the bay at higher and higher concentrations. And so this is really important for us to understand how different different particles and their buoyancy can affect their long-term fate. So some take-home messages. Plastic fibers are a major part of the microplastic pollution. We saw fibers being the dominant form of microplastics and in all of the matrices that we looked at. Denser fibers may accumulate in the bay, while more buoyant fibers may move more easily through the environment. Fish and other wildlife eat fibers, and the impacts are still uncertain and still being researched. Fibers can shed not only during washing, but as well as drying and wearing, and just from various uses. So thanks for your time. We have a website, which I've listed here, that provides more information, has a link to our report, as well as other work that we're working on. I wanted to thank our collaborators as well as our funders.
Great. Thank you so much, Diana. Well, awesome. You know, I did want to start with you since it's fresh in our minds as we move into our Q&A section. Thank you, everyone who has entered a Q&A into that box. Feel free to keep popping those in over the next 20 minutes or so. We're trying to actually time our session so that you all can go back to the main fiber shed room together. But so I'll start with Diana. You know, you shared some amazing results that you've found and given a little bit about where you think sources and transport of these microplastics are coming from. What is SFEI working on now to address these findings, especially as it relates to fibers? And then I wanted to tag a question from Chad just about strategic addressing the stormwater aspects, because I know you're definitely have prioritized stormwater mitigation as well. So I'd love to just have you speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, I think the major shift in our thinking from this study is to focus on the stormwater pathway for microplastics. Currently, we're working on a project funded by the California Ocean Protection Council to do literature and expert interviews to understand what are the sources and pathways for microplastics to enter urban stormwater. And in particularly, we're focusing on fibers, looking at textiles, including cigarette filters aren't, but we're also looking at cigarette filters because we're seeing a lot of cellulose acetate in our urban stormwater. Right. Also looking at single-use plastics and how that breaks down and can become microplastics in the environment. Another project we're working on is to do more monitoring of urban stormwater. And that study is really interesting because we're monitoring bioretention rain gardens, which are designed as a green urban stormwater infrastructure to treat pollutants. But we had one study where we found that it also can be effective in removing microplastics. So we're really excited to do more of that research to find mitigation measures. It's not going to be an end all, like we won't be able to remove them. We want to focus on sources, but that is one method of removing microplastics from urban stormwater in a narrow scope. Another study we're working on is to look at how effective wastewater treatment processes are in removing microplastics. And that's a partnership with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project.
Great. And, you know, I think your organization also was part of this as well, but SCORE putting on the microplastic health effects recording. I think that'd be another great resource for this audience because I believe they're publicly available now. Yeah, did you?
Thanks for bringing that up. Yes, so that's a workshop that we're working with SQUIRP, as well as Ocean Protection Council and the State Water Board to host. And that's a project to better understand the impacts of microplastics. Currently, there's a series of talks where invited speakers talk about their most recent research on microplastics, and the recordings are posted on the SQUIRP website. I don't know if someone can help post that link.
Yeah.
And then the plan is to bring all of these experts together. Of course, COVID's kind of delaying that process and creating some logistical hurdles, but bring all of these experts together to kind of understand our understanding of the impacts and either develop thresholds or develop a roadmap for what we need to do to understand what the thresholds are for impacts.
Great, great. Yes. Well, awesome. I'm going to move on to Diane. It does look like we're trying to wrap in 10 minutes or so. So I'll try to cover as many of the audience questions as possible, and also the things Diane, Kirstin, and Diana and I had talked about. So Diane, you sort of gave us that nugget and said, you won your court case, and you were able to have Formosa commit to zero discharge. I wanted to give you time to explain a little bit more about what that process looks like now for your organization, for your community, and ensuring that that discharge does not happen moving forward. What are you doing with that settlement, and what's next for your effort?
One, like I said, we had 50 million for local projects. So we put $50 million spread out over a 5-year period for local projects. And I can go into those later if people interested in the projects that we've got going. But the regarding the zero discharge, they committed to zero discharge of plastics from their plant, and that's plastics, pellets, and powder. And they said even if the state environmental agency did not put it in their permit, they would abide by it. But interesting is now the state environmental agency is now looking at zero discharge of plastic for all plastic industry in Texas. And the Texas legislature right now has a bill out to make plastics prohibited from plastic plants in Texas. And also, I believe Tom Udall in Washington, D.C. has a NERDL bill out, and it is to bring zero discharge of plastics for all in plastic industry in the United States. And so there has been like national, state, and even the environmental agency, which is notorious for not looking at this issue, now looking at it. And we are, because it's never been done before, zero discharge of plastics. And so we are inventing how to do it right now. And one, we have had a lot of information on why they were losing so much plastic, where they were losing it. And it's not only the pictures like I showed you where there were emissions problems, but the way the stormwater outfalls were not working. Sometimes the stormwater outfalls were literally going uphill instead of down toward to the creeks, and basically they were losing pellets and powder in the units, and when they were trying to truck them by train, by trucks in the different units. And so right now we're looking at the engineers trying to correct all of that. And so while we have zero discharge of plastics, it's enforceable. I think the first year, if there's any plastic or NERDLs, then it's $15,000 per day per body of water. And for the second year, it's $20,000. For the third year, I believe it goes up to $25,000 to $30,000 per day. And eventually in 4 years, it's up to $50,000 a day. So it's hopeful that the enforcement gives them incentive to work for zero discharge, because it is an agreement we have for zero discharge, and we intend to implement it.
Great, great. Such powerful stuff. Thank you so much, Diane. I wanted to switch gears a little bit to Kirstin and have her share a little bit more about the Western potential we have to clothe ourselves. And if you can speak a little bit too, we've got lots of questions about, well, what do I do with my existing synthetic fiber clothing today? What can we do to dispose of it? I'm not sure if that was part of the work, but if you have any commentary there, I'd love for you to weave that in as well. But let's start with Western fiber regional potential.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to, I know we all feel this, congratulate Diane for what she's accomplished. And I just like the power of citizens to stop and redirect the course of something that's really a system that's not working is so powerful. And so I just, my hat's off to you. And anyway, so I'm going to get back to the regional potential of this Western region's fiber shed to substitute that 54%, or it's probably a little bit higher actually, in just the general population sampling, with natural fibers to create 100% compostable, natural, environmentally friendly wardrobe. We teamed up and talked a lot with the Fiber Sheds Regional Fiber Manufacturing Initiatives group. And they have this really good assessment of the current capabilities of this Western US fiber region's manufacturing, like state, where it stands right now. They looked at the 4 fibers, the prominent fibers in our region, in the Western region: wool, cotton, and bast fibers, which are hemp and flax. You can see in this handy chart where they see like industrial capabilities and where they're more artisanal right now, and where some of the gaps are that they think could be activated. So we help them by taking a look at data to see like what is the availability of material within the Western region. And we helped create some maps too. Like you see this map on the left that shows where the scouring production capacity currently is in the US, kind of the landscape of wool production by county. And then, it helps to zero in on if we were looking at adding more pieces of the fiber system back to the Western region, then where would a good location for that be? And so some of those conversations are happening now about where we could potentially propose to have a facility in the Western region, because as you can see, there's not that capacity right now. So we also just did some analysis of just how much material is there. We through different data sets that we could find and different interviews that we did. This one was with Sheep USA. Then we also looked at the current cotton supply in the Western region. And that's sort of the lay of the land for this. The US exports a lot of cotton, and we have a lot of it, and the Western region has quite a bit, not so much
some of
as
the best
some of the
cotton
other
in the
regions.
world.
Yeah. So instead of being completely manufactured and processed and then source to sink created in a complete system within the US, this then is going to other countries and then comes back to us and we wear it. But in addition to cotton, we looked at flax. Currently, we are growing a lot of flax, but we're not growing it for its fiber. It's for mostly seed and oils. We did learn a lot about how Oregon and parts of the Willamette Valley were formerly, really big flax producers, linen. And those then, of course, those processes were lost through globalization. But one of the things that, we're thinking about with FiberShed and with others, like the Reshoring Initiative, is that we really feel like the globalization of the textile systems and many other systems has really hurt us in many ways. It's hurt our economy. It's sort of like holding us back from really having a vibrant, healthy source to sink fiber system like we could have. So this behind some of these data mapping and considerations, we're looking at how can we bring it back.
Well, Kirstin, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. They're telling me they're ready for us in the next room. So
Okay.
I know you're covering multiple natural fiber types here and the regional potential. I'm really excited for this report to come out, and I know FiberShed will be sharing it with their community. So if you're not already signed up for the newsletter, make sure you are. Thank you everyone for joining us today on Following the Plastic Flow. Thank you Diane and Diana and Kirstin for your amazing work in this area. It's really inspiring to be able to understand the flow and all the different ways that we can impact our material impact in this world through how we think about clothing and things are made. So I appreciate all your time and I appreciate the tech team's time, and thank you FiberShed for inviting me. Hope to see you all again soon. Bye-bye.